I was folding his socks when I heard it. Not whispered. Not behind closed doors. Said plain as day to his wife. She's done nothing for us. Not really. Just house stuff. My knees buckled. Not from age, but from a heartbreak no doctor could treat. After 20 years under his roof, raising his children, tending his home, giving up my pension, I was just nothing. They say a mother never stops being a mother. Even when her child is grown. Even when her hands shake while stirring the soup, and her back aches after ironing a mountain of little shirts. Even when her name becomes Mom, only when something is needed. I'm Miriam Rose. 70 years old. Widow. Mother of 1. Grandmother of 3. And up until 3 months ago, I believed, foolishly, that love earned by sacrifice could never be forgotten. My day used to start before the sun. I'd be up in the quiet dark of the house, brushing crumbs off the kitchen counter, reheating yesterday's coffee. Not because I had to, but because I thought that's what family did. Helped, served, showed love in folded towels and warm breakfasts. I moved in with my son Adam and his wife Tessa after my husband died. I didn't want to be alone, and they had just welcomed their second child. It'll be good for everyone, Adam had said, wrapping his arm around me while we stood in my old living room, the one I was about to leave behind. That house, my home of 43 years, had been sold to help them pay off their mortgage and build an extension. I didn't need much. Just a room of my own and the sound of family near. I told myself I was lucky. Blessed even. But over the years, the walls of this new house began to press in. They were beautiful walls, freshly painted and filled with designer touches, but they weren't mine. The family photos that lined them didn't include me. Not anymore. The holidays that used to revolve around my cooking became Tessa's territory. And I was given tasks, not invitations. Still I smiled. I made Adam's favorite lentil stew on Thursdays, helped the kids with homework, sewed buttons on school uniforms, and made myself invisible whenever guests came over. I let the little slights go. The times I wasn't told about a school recital. The birthday cake that read, "From Mom and Dad," with no space for Grandma. The family vacations planned while I stayed behind with the dog. I told myself, they're busy. Young families have a lot going on. You're helping. You're appreciated. Just not always thanked out loud. But then came the words I wasn't supposed to hear. That Tuesday afternoon, I'd just come back from picking up groceries. My own money, always, and was in the laundry room folding Adam's socks. I'd done it since he was 5. It made me feel needed. Connected. That's when I heard him. She's done nothing for us. Not really. Just house stuff. It was the way he said it. Casual, dismissive, like I was the housekeeper who overstayed her welcome. I remember my fingers freezing mid-fold. The sock slipped from my hand. I pressed my palm to the counter to steady myself. My heart beat louder than the dryer behind me. Tessa didn't reply. She didn't defend me. She just said, "We'll have to find a way to ask her to move out. It's getting awkward." That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, wondering if every sacrifice I'd made had been in vain. Had I traded away my savings, my home, my peace, just to become a burden? I remembered giving Adam the down payment for their first home. I remembered offering to babysit the kids full-time when they couldn't afford daycare. I remembered the birthday where I gave Tessa my mother's sapphire ring, the one thing of beauty I'd kept through the decades, just to show her she was family. And now I was just house stuff. The next morning, I made coffee for everyone. Just like always. Adam took his travel mug without meeting my eyes. Tessa was already on her phone. The children kissed my cheek, distracted, innocent. I smiled, but my heart was unraveling like an old sleeve. That afternoon, I walked to the park. Sat on a bench where the breeze smelled of cut grass and distant hope. I pulled out an envelope from my purse, one I'd never dared open in years. Inside was a letter from my late husband. He'd written it before passing. Just a short note and a business card. If you're ever in trouble, call George. He's honest. And he'll protect what's yours. George had been my husband's friend and attorney. I'd always thought the card was more for comfort than use. But now I wasn't sure. I didn't call him that day. But I placed the card beside my teacup at dinner. A silent reminder to myself that I wasn't helpless. Not anymore. Later that week, the final blow came. Adam asked me, in front of the children, to start keeping track of household chores, so they could talk about fair contributions. Tessa added something about pulling equal weight, even though I did more for that home than either of them noticed. I nodded. I said nothing. But I walked straight to my room, locked the door, and stared at the envelope again. It was time. Not to cry. Not to beg. But to remember who I was before I became invisible. The morning after I decided to call George, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. My silver hair was pulled back into its usual low bun. My face was soft with age, lined with stories, of love, of loss, of motherhood. But my eyes, they were different now. Tired, yes, but clearer, sharper, awake. It wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about dignity. About reclaiming something I had given away too freely for far too long. My sense of worth. I waited until Adam and Tessa left for work, and the children were at school. Then I picked up the phone and dialed the number on the faded card. I expected a receptionist. I expected a long wait. But to my surprise, a familiar deep voice answered on the second ring. Miriam. George sounded just as I remembered. Gravelly, warm, steady. I was wondering when you'd call. I don't know what it was about his voice, but I started crying. Not the kind of crying you can hide behind polite conversation. The kind that comes from years of holding it in. The kind that tastes like salt and quiet rage. He didn't interrupt. He let me speak. I told him everything. From the sale of my house to the sacrifices, the unpaid childcare, the little humiliations, and finally, the words I overheard in the laundry room. I don't want to punish them, George, I whispered. I don't want to disappear like this. I don't want to keep pretending I don't matter. There was a pause. Then he said the first words that made me feel like I had some ground beneath me again. Miriam, it's time to put your name back on your own life. He invited me to his office that Friday. I wore my best sweater, the navy one with pearl buttons, and even put on a bit of lipstick. I don't know why. Maybe because I needed to feel like I was showing up for myself. George's office was exactly what I expected. Shelves of thick books, wood-paneled walls, and the comforting smell of leather and old coffee. He gave me a warm smile and gestured for me to sit. I've already looked into some things, he said, sliding a file across the desk. You never signed over any official power of attorney to Adam, which is good. But the house they're living in, technically, you funded the majority of the down payment from the proceeds of your own home sale. I traced the wire transfers. It gives us legal ground. I blinked. But it's in their name. He nodded. It is. But a good lawyer, which I happen to be, can make a strong case that you were misled. That you gave under emotional duress or without full understanding. Especially since you have no formal rental agreement, no legal protection, and have been contributing to the home financially for over a decade. My head spun. But I didn't keep receipts. I never thought I'd need to. That's the thing about women like you, Miriam. You give without keeping score. But the world we live in? It counts everything. I looked down at my hands, fingers knotted together. I don't want to take the house. I just want to not be treated like some old maid living off their charity. George leaned back, folding his hands. Then let's do this quietly. Strategically. But you need to protect yourself moving forward. And for that, we need more information. He suggested hiring a private investigator. Not to dig dirt, but to build context. Bank records, statements, any misuse of funds, any manipulation. I hesitated at first, but the more I thought about how quickly they'd discard me, the easier it became to say yes. The next few weeks passed in quiet rebellion. I smiled. I served dinner. I helped with homework. But at night, I met with George. I signed documents. I pulled old bank records. I made lists of every time I'd paid a bill, covered groceries, bought clothes for the children. I even dug up a photo of the day I handed Adam the sapphire ring. Proof. Not of value but of intent. Meanwhile, Adam and Tessa grew bolder. One Sunday morning, I overheard them talking in the kitchen while I pretended to sleep. "She's just too involved," Tessa complained. "I feel like we don't have our own space." "I know," Adam said. "But we can't just throw her out. She'll make it dramatic. We need to make her want to leave." And that's exactly what they did. They started cutting me out of little things. Adam stopped texting me when he'd be late. Tessa began double-checking my grocery purchases. They canceled our family dinners without telling me. The grandkids were still loving, still innocent, but even they started to absorb the change. Less cuddles. Less questions. They were being taught slowly that I was background. It was a strange kind of heartbreak, being erased in slow motion. But I stayed calm. I documented everything. I met George weekly. And one day, the investigator brought a discovery that made my breath stop short. A savings account. Under Tessa's name. Funded partially from an account that had my name on it 5 years ago. One I hadn't realized had remained active after I sold my house. Somehow, funds had been redirected. Small amounts, bit by bit. But over years, it added up to nearly $27,000. When I confronted George about it, he only nodded. "That's enough to file for recovery. And possibly more." But what hurt more than the number was the idea that my generosity had been treated like a well to siphon from. Quietly. Steadily. Like I didn't matter. Like I wouldn't notice. Like I didn't count. It was then I realized, they didn't want me gone because I was inconvenient. They wanted me gone because they thought I was powerless. But they were wrong. The turning point came 2 nights later. We were having dinner. I'd made Tessa's favorite, chicken piccata with lemon caper sauce. She barely touched it. Halfway through, Adam put his fork down and cleared his throat. "Mom," he said with a smile too forced to be kind, "Tessa and I have been thinking. Maybe it's time you consider moving to a senior community. You've been here so long, and we want you to have more independence." Independence. As if I were a teenager begging for a later curfew. Tessa chimed in. "Someplace where you can make friends. Focus on you for once." I looked at both of them. At the table I'd polished, the food I'd cooked, the faces I'd loved. And then I smiled. I said, "That's a wonderful idea." They blinked. Adam laughed awkwardly. "Really? That was easier than I thought." I stood up, wiped my hands and said, "Let's talk more about it. Tomorrow. I have something I want to show you both." Then I went to my room and opened the folder George had prepared for me. Thick with documents, bank records, legal filings, and a formal letter of intent. The next day would not be about begging. It would be about boundaries. It would be the beginning of me reclaiming me. The sun rose slow the next morning, casting soft gold over the dining room table. The same table I'd set for every Thanksgiving since moving into their home. Only this time, there were no placemats. No centerpiece. No steaming dishes. Just a thick brown envelope sitting neatly at the center. I sat across from it, hands folded, waiting. Tessa came down first, barefoot, wearing a silk robe, her blonde hair twisted up in a bun. She raised an eyebrow when she saw me. Then the envelope. "Good morning," she said, guarded. Morning, I replied, my tone even. Adam followed moments later, tapping on his phone. What's all this? I nodded to the envelope. Something we've needed to talk about for a long time. They both looked at each other. A flash of discomfort passed between them like static. Please, I gestured. Sit. They did. Adam leaned back like he was preparing for some dramatic announcement. Tessa crossed her arms. I want you to know, I began, my voice calm but firm, that everything I ever did in this house was out of love. Tessa let out a small sigh, already bored. I raised your children, Adam. I gave you the money for my house. I cooked your meals, did your laundry, stayed up with sick children so you could sleep. I gave you my time, my savings, my energy, and my heart. Neither of them spoke. And in return, I continued, you dismissed me. You excluded me. You began siphoning from an account I didn't know still existed. And when you thought I wasn't listening, you called me nothing. Adam's face went pale. Tessa stiffened. I slid the envelope across the table. Inside was everything. A report showing the misuse of my old savings account. A notarized statement listing the amount I contributed to the down payment of their home. Legal paperwork prepared by George to reclaim my funds and file a formal grievance. A drafted letter stating my intention to sue for recovery and damages if necessary. And finally, a personal letter written in my own hand. Not to them, but to myself. Tessa pulled the documents out and began flipping through them. Her face flushed. Adam opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. I'm not asking for pity, I said, standing. And I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for what's mine. Adam finally spoke. Mom, this is crazy. No, I said softly. What was crazy was believing love could excuse disrespect. That silence was safer than truth. That I didn't matter because I didn't bring home a paycheck. Tessa's voice was cold. So what now? You take us to court? Sue your own son? I looked at her. This woman who wore my mother's ring, who once cried on my shoulder when her second child was born. I saw not the daughter I'd hoped to have, but the stranger who always saw me as an employee, never as a mother-in-law. No, I said. Not unless you make me. There was a pause. Then I reached into my sweater pocket and pulled out a copy of a rental agreement. I will no longer live in this house without rights. If I stay, it's as a paying tenant, with full legal protections. If I go, I will request a reimbursement of my investment in the property and file for breach of verbal contract. Adam's jaw clenched. You'd really do that? I already did, I said, voice clear. You'll receive the formal notice from George later today. I walked away then. Not out of drama. Out of clarity. I packed my things slowly over the next 2 weeks. Not out of spite but out of purpose. George helped me find a small apartment in a quiet part of town. A tidy 1-bedroom with a garden, terrace and sunlight in every corner. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. The grandkids came by one afternoon, confused and tearful. Why are you leaving, Grandma? I knelt beside them. Because sometimes even grown-ups have to remind people how to treat them kindly. I still love you. Always will. But I needed to love myself too. They hugged me tight. I sent them home with cookies, just like always. The weeks that followed were strange. Lonely, yes. But not empty. I planted herbs on the terrace. I bought a yellow kettle. I painted for the first time in decades. I even joined a small book club at the community center and found myself laughing again. A real laugh. Not the polite one I wore like armor. One morning, George called. They responded, he said. They won't fight. They're offering a settlement. Full reimbursement of the home contribution. And an apology letter, of sorts. I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. I simply said, thank you. Because the truth was, the real win wasn't the money. It was knowing I still existed outside their view of me. That I could reclaim a life, however late, with grace and courage. I wrote one last letter. Not to them. To myself. I tucked it into my dresser drawer for days when I might forget. It read, "You are not invisible. You are not a servant. You are not unworthy just because your kindness was misunderstood. You are more than folded towels and hot meals. You are strength wrapped in soft hands. And you are free now." 2 months had passed since I moved out. My days looked different now. Not just in scenery, but in rhythm. I no longer rose before dawn to make breakfast for others. Instead, I sat by my garden terrace, cradling a hot cup of tea, watching the hummingbirds dip between the lavender. My body moved slower, but for the first time in years, it moved on its own terms. Some mornings, I'd pause mid-sip, expecting to hear the shouts of children, the clatter of cereal bowls, or Tessa's clipped voice asking where the ironing spray was. But there was only peace. Real peace. I didn't realize how much noise I had lived under. Not just the sounds of the house, but the noise of being useful, needed, available. I had mistaken all that motion for meaning. Now, I was rediscovering myself in the stillness. I kept a simple calendar on my fridge. Tuesdays were for the community book club. Thursdays, watercolor painting at the senior center. Sundays, I cooked something new. Just for me. I even got a little folding table to host tea for 2. Just in case someone ever came by. One morning, I received a letter. Handwritten. The return address in Adam's handwriting. My heart hesitated. Inside was a card. No envelope, just folded paper and uneven lines. "Mom, we didn't handle things right. I didn't. I see that now. I let pride get in the way of love, and I'm sorry. Tessa and I didn't expect you to stand up like that. We thought you'd always stay. We took your silence for agreement. But I realize now, silence is often a last resort. I miss you. The kids miss you. There's a gap in our lives we don't know how to fill. I'm not asking you to come back. I know we haven't earned that. I'm just asking that someday, you might forgive me. Love. Adam." I read it twice. Then a third time. I didn't cry. Not because it didn't move me. But because forgiveness, real forgiveness, comes after healing, not before it. And I was still healing. Later that week, I was at the grocery store when I ran into someone I hadn't seen in years. My friend Lucille. She'd always been the one who spoke her mind, even when others didn't want to hear it. She took one look at me and smiled. "Miriam Rose. You look taller." I laughed. Maybe the air's different on this side of freedom. She leaned in. "I heard what happened. That you left." I nodded, gently. Lucille squeezed my hand. "Good for you. Too many women stay quiet and vanish. But not you. You walked out in full light." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I thought about the letter, about the silence in my new home, about the surprising lightness in my chest each morning. Lucille tilted her head. "What are you going to do now?" I looked out the window, at the buses rushing past, the families walking together, the small bursts of city life unfolding without permission. "I think I'm going to become someone new," I said. "Or maybe, someone I used to be before I forgot myself." We hugged goodbye, and I walked home with tulips in my basket. Yellow, like the teapot I just bought. A week later, there was a knock at the door. Not loud. Not rushed. I opened it to find my eldest granddaughter, Sophie, standing on the stoop. She clutched a piece of paper in her hand. "Hi, Grandma," she whispered. "Can I come in?" I opened the door wide. We sat at the small table on the terrace, the sunlight warming her shoulders as she looked around. "This is really nice," she said. "It smells like rosemary." I smiled. "I planted it last week. It's growing fast." She looked down at the paper she held. "Mom and Dad don't know I'm here. I waited. She unfolded the sheet. It was a drawing, crayon and pencil, a little uneven, but full of love. The image was simple. A woman in a chair, surrounded by flowers and books and a window full of sun. Below it were 4 words in her careful handwriting. "You still matter, Grandma." I blinked away tears. I reached across the table and held her hand. "Thank you, sweetheart. That's the most precious thing I've received in years." We sat there for a while, not talking about the past, not pressing into wounds. Just being. Before she left, she asked, "Will you ever come back?" I hesitated. "I don't think I can go back to who I was in that house," I said gently. "But I'll always be your grandma, wherever I am." She hugged me tight. And as she walked away, her figure small and bright in the fading afternoon light, I felt something settle inside me. I had not lost everything. I had regained me. In the following months I started writing. Just little stories, letters to no one, reflections. George connected me with a friend who ran a small online blog for women over 60. I submitted something on a whim. 2 weeks later, they featured my piece, "The Woman in the Laundry Room: How I Took My Life Back After Becoming Invisible." The response was overwhelming. Letters came in from women across the country. Some had stayed quiet in their daughters' homes for years. Others had sold houses, pensions, even heirlooms, for love that never came back. They wrote to say thank you, that it gave them hope. One letter said, "I thought I was the only one. But now, I think maybe I still have time to stand up." And that became my purpose. Not bitterness. Not revenge. But helping others reclaim their place at the table, even if they had to build a new one from scratch. My story didn't end with courtrooms or settlements. It ended with a garden of rosemary, a yellow kettle, and the quiet joy of being seen. I didn't need a mansion. I didn't need to be praised. I just needed to know that the woman who folded socks for 20 years could still unfold her voice and be heard. Closing reflection. If you've ever felt like you disappeared into the walls of someone else's life, if you've ever traded your joy for duty, your voice for peace, your identity for acceptance, let me tell you this. You are not a ghost in your own story. You are not just anything. You are not too old. You are not too late. You are still here. And that means you still have time to choose yourself.